Welcome to the first full episode of the New Fashion Conservatives podcast. I'm your host, Justin Phillips. With me, the man known to the X-verse as Shadow Governor Voss, SGV.
Robin Voss's strongest suit.
And let's get right into it. So we're talking about what's been happening with the Wisconsin GOP over the last couple of cycles, the frustration, the disappointment, the fact that
Where do we start?
That we should be winning. Frankly, it's not like the Dems have moderated. It's not like they've become better than us.
The opportunity is there. The opportunity is there.
Exactly.
We have not grasped it, and I think we need to discuss a little bit of a post-mortem. Obviously Schimel being the most recent failure, but the last 6 years, really, of kind of on and off. And I think, you were talking about earlier, the fact that Ron Johnson twice, Trump twice, John Leiber once.
And Brian Hagedorn. Let's not...
Sorry. Brian Hagedorn.
That's the one spring race, though.
Other than that, it has been a many years. I still remember Brian Hagedorn. I remember I was downtown Milwaukee at Brothers Bar and Grill. I don't remember why I was down there watching the returns come in, like, oh my gosh, he's going to pull this off by the skin of his teeth.
Yep.
And, maybe I should just go back. Maybe I should just be drinking downtown for all of the spring elections because that was the last time we won. All the other ones, I've been, in a war room crunching numbers, trying to determine if we're going to win, and it never works out. So maybe I should just drink more. I think that's the conclusion I'm coming to here.
Well, we're doing a little bit of that here tonight.
Yes, of course.
Got our nice Wisconsin bourbon.
You want to plug it real quick? I mean, might as well.
Should I? Yes.
Not
a sponsor.
Not a sponsor.
But we've got Drop Tine 12-point bourbon whiskey finished in brandy barrels from Drop Tine Spirits, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and it's delicious. We are drinking batch number 5, bottle number 11352.
I'm not a big snob on alcohol. I'll drink pretty much anything that's put in front of me. So, and it's really good. It is actually really good. I was telling you earlier that it's a lot different than my Wild Turkey, which is Wild Turkey 101. I don't drink it for the taste. They say the straightest point, the quickest point between whatever. It's a straight line. Whatever that saying is, it's a straight line. And that's the Wild Turkey 101. But this stuff is really good. But speaking of things that make me want to drink, spring elections.
Yeah.
Not great. The sheer amount of time it took, it was 9:15. Although I think by 8:45 we really kind of knew.
Yeah.
But 9:15, 9:30, close up shop.
For a race that had as much money and effort put into it by the folks on our side, whether it was the YRs, whether it was Turning Point Action, whether it was Americans for Prosperity, and the volume of ads. I don't think I've ever seen anything like that in a spring election. And for it to all go up in smoke within an hour of the polls closing, the best I could say is now I know what it feels like to be a Democrat in 2012 during the recalls. And, I was
being just utterly crushed right out of the gate, pretty much.
Exactly. And in that moment, a lot of frustration.
What goes around comes around, I guess.
A lot of questioning about
soul searching. Who's
leading at the party, who needs to step up. I think we saw a little bit of that at some of the caucus and exec board level discussions and elections, but still, we're not moving in the right direction.
Well, one thing that frustrated me a little bit is right after the Schimel election, there was a lot of talk about, well, this we were doomed. Mm-hmm. What do you mean? No. Why are we running people then? We might as well just be like what the Dems did when they didn't run people for Supreme Court because it was so bad.
Yep.
We should never do that. I will never admit that much defeat. Yes, it's bad, but we should not ever be to that point. And I don't think just writing something off as just a backlash election or we didn't have a chance anyway. I know abortion back in 22 was a big discussion. This kind of, I think, is just a cope on people on our side is saying, oh, we were going to do... No. We had millions of dollars. of course, the big issue that a lot of people I think are missing is that all the money was on the issue side and not on the party side, whereas the Dem money all went to the party, which then went to Crawford, which she got the better rates, and we spent more. They spent more money than Crawford in the end, but you saw the ads and it was 3-4 to 1.
Exactly.
And what are you going to do with that?
No, and I think if we just wanted to be doomers and say it's time to throw in the towel on certain elections, like, we wouldn't be hosting this podcast. We would be spending our time searching Zillow for places in red states.
Yeah.
And let's
Because it'd be much easier.
And let's remember, history started before 2016 in election politics. In 2006, J.B. Van Hollen, Attorney General candidate, won a statewide race in what was otherwise one of two back-to-back very difficult years, wave election years for Democrats, very bad for Republicans. And then let's remember 2022, not a great year for Republicans in Wisconsin, but other places had that red wave. We were expecting that red wave. We were expecting Tim Michels as governor. And in fact, what we got was a re-election of Tony Evers and Tim Michels maybe not even helping Ron Johnson. I thought Ron Johnson was going to help Tim Michels get over the top. I think in reality, Ron Johnson was dragged down a little bit by Tim Michels.
Probably a little bit.
So
and we'll never, obviously we're speculating. Hindsight is 2020, of
Right.
course. But yeah, it's amazing that Ron still, pulled it out in the end. But it's just been another disappointment after another disappointment. And we can't keep on doing this.
No.
Ron Johnson and Trump being basically the majority of our wins. What happens after Trump's gone?
Yep.
How old is Ron Johnson? I mean, he said, he kind of gave that tidbit this week where he's like, oh, well, I don't plan to run for re-election, but you never know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't know what that means. And I really don't know how old he actually is. I'd have to ask Siri for that, but I'm assuming he's mid-70s.
It'd be late 60s at the youngest.
No, wait. Okay, we're going to do this here.
We're gonna look. But while we're talking about that,
How old is Ron Johnson?
Ron Johnson is 70 years old.
70.
Okay,
Okay.
70. Okay. So I was wrong. 70. That's
I
not
hope
bad.
he's still riding roller coasters the way the stories of him riding roller coasters in the past were. But like you said, we have to be winning more of these races. The Dems, look what they introduced in the legislature this week. This alphabet mafia style, replacing the words mother with pregnant person across 300 lines of state code.
And I'm not claiming to be the owner of this term or the creator of it, but I've heard the term rainbow jihad, which I think is really funny, personally. But yes, it's not like the Democrats are somehow messaging better.
No.
Yeah, I think it's strictly a money thing. I think that clearly there are bright spots in the party, and we should emulate those. But the Dems are full bore ahead, putting Minnesota Democrats to shame in some regards. Where did you know that Tim Walz actually made an agreement with the Republicans to actually roll back benefits for illegals?
Wow.
Yeah, and he got a lot of pushback from the left, from his own Democrats. I just remember there was a lot of videos circulating of this press conference, and the Dems were trying to get in and screaming and everything. I was like, if Tim Walz is moving to the center, and the Wisconsin Democrats are like, let's all rally behind Judge Dugan, I think we can show that maybe. Yeah, I know we like to point to Minnesota as this hellscape. Which, of course, based off the fact they like to tax their citizens despite having record-setting surpluses, it is in many respects. But the left in Wisconsin is so rabid, because and kudos to Ben Wickler for raising more money than God himself, $200 million over his years with the party, has done them a tremendous service of basically keeping even with the Republicans and taking ground, to see where we're at, where they might flip the Senate next session.
Yeah, no, there's so much to unpack in what you said, and first
I know
and
I kind of
foremost-
touched on a few things.
but first and foremost is the fact that the fundraising discrepancy between what Ben Winkler can do and what RPW has done.
Is it Winkler or is it Wickler?
Okay.
I don't know.
All right.
Winkler, Wickler.
Wickler.
I don't know. I
look
actually,
it
I guess I don't look at it enough. I just assumed you would be right. You could. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
The amount of money that the Democrat Party is currently spending, raising in Wisconsin right now versus what's being raised by the Republicans is just night and day difference. Another, sticking point for a lot of us here. And, we had Elon Musk come in and people wanted to blame him for that loss. I don't know. I think what we've done as a party we've traded a voting block on our side for what is traditionally on our side for a voting block on their side. And what I'm saying is we have gained a lot of low propensity voters who came over from Trump. And we have lost a lot of the mid to high propensity suburban voters. And so how do we message and campaign in a way to bring those people back in eastern Waukesha County, in southern Ozaukee County,
well,
without shedding those people that we've gained outstate?
I struggle with that. I know that we can't obviously just ignore voting blocks. We can't ignore our new voting block of people north of Marathon County, essentially, that don't vote all the time. But we can't, ignore the fact that Brookfield is becoming Wauwatosa West. And
Menominee Falls, too. I mean, I remember on
that
election
entire
night,
border, 124th Avenue, going west. It's all changing.
Election night, I remember seeing Menominee Falls electing far left progressives, like rabid women. I call them awfuls, affluent white female liberals. Some call them D3s, nice. Deranged woke white women. But we're putting those people, not we, but voters are putting those people on school boards. And
it's only a matter of time before we'll have an assembly rep. I mean, obviously, Robin Vining now represents part of Brookfield because of redistricting, and she beat incumbent. Well, technically, Mahalski and Representative Vining were put in an election or in the same map, and Vining clearly won. So that's all changing so much. We can't ignore the fact it's changing. But what do you do? And sometimes I think with the Trump era, obviously politics has gotten confrontational, and some of these issues that maybe we didn't talk about in the 2000s or the 2010s are now coming to a front. And part of me is like, if we had these Republicans voting for Scott Walker back in the day, but they're now not voting for us because of trans issues or something, did we ever have them?
Yeah.
Maybe we were just the Republican Party. First of all, I know, for example, I just picked a trans issue because it's a very black and white issue. There's not many nuanced positions and within that, so it's just very. If you ask someone at the door, what are your thoughts on? You're going to get a probably one way or another issue, and that wasn't really like at the forefront of minds back in the 2010s and stuff, and obviously before then. But now it is, and so sure they might have voted for Scott Walker, but were they ever really a true Republican? Potentially, maybe they like their low taxes, but the social stuff they kind of ignored, and now it's coming to a front.
Totally plausible. And I think the other side of it too is you look at the reforms that the Republicans put together under Scott Walker. Great stuff. I worked on campaigns and worked with legislators during those recalls, and for them to have that backbone to stand up and vote for those things is just shouldn't be discounted at any point. But we're also 15, 14 years removed from those being put in place. Public doesn't have a very long memory with these things, and so they've gotten used to So they've gotten used to taxes where they are, and if the Supreme Court now is going to overturn things like Act 10, people are going to remember
the frog in the boiling water.
Yep. And so as much as I don't want that to happen, as much as I think Act 10 should stay in place for all that work that Governor Walker and the Wisconsin legislature did at that point, people are it's been too long for some of them to really remember what life was like when they had Jim Doyle, when we had record-setting
When things were
unemployment,
bad.
when we had deficits, when we had taxes, when our pension system was absolutely wrecked. Exactly.
Well, I think it's interesting to think about the Schimel race, and a lot of those things came up. Act 10, property taxes, general, bargaining rights, the whole gamut with Act 10. And I know that there were a lot of people online, talk about Act 10, talk about property taxes, when, I don't know, most of our voters didn't even, I think most of our today voters either don't care about Act 10 or didn't even know about Act 10.
Yep.
And I think a lot of our voters, even now, probably would have opposed Act 10 back, especially the more working class of voters would probably have been against Act 10. So I know there was a lot of online discourse about what do we message in these spring elections. And I'm not an expert. I don't get paid to be a consultant yet. We'll see. No, I doubt it. I doubt that. But that being said, going forward, we're going to have to figure this out. I think we made a good step. I think Republicans are always 3 elections from learning a lesson, where the first elections, we don't learn anything. The second one, we get the idea, and the third one, we finally break through. So I see the Dan Kelly as we got absolutely slapped. The second one, I think we learned a little bit with Schimel leaned into more of the politics of it, talking about more of the issues, but I think he tried to straddle a line, and ultimately I don't think it worked. Obviously, there's the whole money thing, the Elon thing, dynamic as well. I'm hoping by the third one, if they're going to just run hacks,
let's run hacks.
Why don't we just run hacks? And I know, to Crawford's credit, I do think she actually straddled the line pretty decently compared to a potato sandwich. And
potentially what Chris Taylor is going to do as a candidate. You want to talk about a D3?
Go for it.
You're talking about someone who is going to have to spend her time doing her job as a judge, running for office, and still finding time to lure children into her gingerbread house in the woods. But you're talking about someone who is like, there's Karl Marx, and then to the left of Karl Marx, you have Chris Taylor. And that is a very scary proposition for people to be in.
Well, the eyebrows are scary enough, personally.
Yeah. Well, because they don't move.
Yeah.
But
they're glued in that position.
To talk about Brad Schimel, though, one of the things, maybe you're not superstitious. Maybe you're a little bit stitious.
Oh, I'm definitely stitious.
Like I am, and like you are, who saw another round of candidates. And I like Brad. Don't get me wrong. Great guy. Really believes in what he was going out there. Really,
I hope he gets an appointment or something.
Yep, deserves a better result than what he got in April. But he also lost statewide in 2018, along with Scott Walker, along with Rebecca Clayfish. Terrible year. I get it. Dan Kelly lost twice. So we're in a situation where
we don't have new blood.
And we got to find, you're right, we have to find a new candidate. We can't have someone who has ran statewide and lost before. It's just not something that happens in Wisconsin. It's both sides have had this problem. Like the Democrats in 2016 against Ron Johnson, they re-ran Russ Feingold.
Yeah.
Tom Barrett has lost 3 times for statewide office.
So we kind of learned, they learned their lesson, and of course then we're learning our lesson now, which again, I think this kind of goes to the election of 3 where we usually get it by the 3rd election.
Yep.
Which by that time, it seems like the Dems are already 1 election ahead of us in something else like fundraising, for example, which we might be able to close the gap now because there's going to be a new DPW chair. We'll see how that shakes out. The Democrat convention's June.
Yes.
I believe.
Yes.
So they're going to pick a new chair. I know Ben Wickler he endorsed his, I don't remember what his position in DPW was.
He's got it. He picked a successor.
Yeah, but as soon as he announced he's not going to run, then before you know it, I don't even remember his name. I really should have looked that up before. But he was instantly had his campaign up, so I'm sure that he got the inside scoop on that. So we'll see how, they say when Nick Saban hung it up, you never want to be the guy that follows the guy.
Right.
Nick Saban, how do you top a Nick Saban career? Kalen DeBoer, obviously, great coach at Washington, and then obviously went to Alabama. Had kind of a rough first season for the college football fans. You never want to be the guy following the guy. And Ben Wickler, I don't know how the Dems get any better than him. I mean, he raised over $200 million in his stint, so big shoes to fill. So we'll see what they can do. So there's an opportunity for the Republicans. But will they take advantage? Is another question.
I hope so, but you want to talk about convention for a couple minutes here. RPW just had theirs. There was a time pre-convention. A lot of people were saying that Brian Schimel might not be the guy. Now, again, Brian's a great guy. Like, he's done a lot for the Republican movement, the conservative movement in the state. But when you're losing as much as you have, you got to look to someone to blame, and it's the same way as an NFL football team. If you have 6 wins, you're looking to the people at the top. You're not necessarily blaming
6 wins over 4 years.
Yeah, and you're not blaming the people who are doing the blocking and tackling. You're blaming the people who are in charge, and no one.
Although we might need to have some discussions about the people blocking and tackling too. But
this is true.
That's for maybe another time.
But who steps up, I guess, is the question I really want to ask. Is you can be all for firing someone, any situation, but then you have to know
what comes next.
Someone that you can replace them. And I've kind of hinted at some people that I thought should be in executive positions at the party, Nick Redinger being one of them. Mm-hmm. So Schimel is still there. I want to hope that these past couple of months and years were wake-up calls to know that we need to do something more or different.
But I would also like to say that the visceral reaction after Schimel, and I had it too. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've never done this, but at least in my political, years of interest, where I was watching it, I turned it off. I couldn't watch it after 9:15. Before they called it, it's over. Mm-hmm. It's done. I can't even remember. Was it Ozaki? I remember the numbers in Ozaki were not going well, and it was still blue at like 9:15. It's over. Mm-hmm. There's no way he's recovering from this. And the Waukesha numbers were going from like 61 to 60, 59, 58. Yep. And I can't even remember what it finally turned. I think it was 58 or 57. It was less than Trump, if I do remember correctly. And everyone's looking for someone to blame. It's a very visceral, very natural reaction for people to have.
Yeah,
I had it too, but I do think that we have to be wary of just obviously accusing without backing up. And I know some people maybe on the quote-unquote Patriot front would probably have done that. I know that there's the RPW versus kind of everybody. And there's the whole county party debacle up in, the Fox Valley and such. I like Brian. I would love to maybe have him on at some point, or Zoom or what have you, to talk about what's going on in the party and where do we go from here. But what I saw from when did he get elected? Was it 20? It was before. It was after 2020, right?
Correct.
I think it was 2021.
I believe so.
And to me, I remember this somewhat vaguely that he seemed like he was everyone likes him.
Yeah.
He was kind of the unity ticket. And obviously we've talked about unity for 5 years now. Mm-hmm. I don't know how much. I think it's improved maybe a little bit, but not to the point that we're going to be cranking down W's here at the statewide level. Mm. But he was kind of the unity ticket to keep everyone from fighting.
Yep. And now everyone's fighting.
So
yeah.
What should we continue with that? I don't know. I'm not an expert, but I see that as why he was brought in. And obviously there's always going to be these fights. It's a matter of when, not if. So
you talk about the county party thing. Having been elected, running campaigns for a long time, I have seen the best and worst in county parties, and there's always going to be an ebb and flow. There's going to be up years. There's going to be down years, and the goal, of course, is to make it through those down years and those bad chairmen or chairmen that have just hung on too long, that isolate too many people. I've seen it. Like I said, I've seen it happen in multiple counties where I've been involved in races. So I know we've got some real rough ones right now, but I think we know about those because of social media, because of some of the reporting that's been done by some of the outlets. We don't know about those ones so I don't necessarily want to get into them.
No,
but they're
and we
also
don't have to.
I don't want to pick at old wounds from a decade ago.
Yeah.
But they're out there.
Oh, well, and plus there's new ones right now.
Yeah. Let's talk about that.
Well, and I would actually like to have, and this is, another thing that we should do is have someone on regarding that. You didn't go to convention. I didn't go to convention. Mm-hmm. I watched a little bit of convention. Mm-hmm. I probably shouldn't have. I think it was on in the background. I really wasn't paying attention. But I know that there always is a big hubbub about a resolution, about the Constitution and how we're following this.
Yeah.
Like, the moment people realize that no one cares about the resolutions, like the resolutions is really just for people to be a pet project so they feel good.
Yep.
No one cares about the resolutions. I'm sorry to tell you, if you care more about, and this goes at the national level too, because I know there was a big hubbub about Trump changing the GOP platform. Mm-hmm. No one cares about that. Like, you're going to have your own personal views about the border, about the economy, about abortion stuff. That's great. As long as we can loosely call ourselves Republicans, at least at this point, no one cares about the resolutions. We shouldn't make a big deal about it. Convention always turns into this big sword fight about resolution this, resolution that. The Constitution doesn't say exactly this, therefore we're not. Guys, stop drafting resolutions. Go knock 50 doors on a Saturday.
It's better use of their time.
It's a better use of your time. It's, get outside and stop, yelling at your fellow Republicans about something that literally doesn't matter. And I'm so frustrated. We should do away with it completely.
I agree.
Or just handle it at the local county party level and not state convention.
As far as I'm aware, there's no organization out there that's trying to score Republican candidates and Republican legislators against the RPW resolutions. So putting those in, all we're doing is getting a 6-paragraph news article at the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel about how we endorse the 1849 abortion ban or something like that. Like, you're just setting yourselves up to give opposition fodder and paint candidates into a corner on an issue that we are currently losing on. And I don't necessarily want to be losing on that issue.
No.
My personal beliefs aside, I'm more pro-life than probably the average Wisconsin voter.
Agreed.
And I'm aware of that. But to put it in writing and then now force every candidate in the state to take an opinion on that is not helping our side.
I mean, I don't think, and it'll be interesting to see what the Dems do at their convention, but I don't think they're going to be going at the convention and saying, we are going to, a resolution to protect all illegal immigrants from deportation and give them all free health care and Medicaid and so on and so. I don't think they're going to do it. I mean,
no, and they're not, they're not going to say that boys need to be treated as girls.
Yeah, or you have to protect transgenders so that they can be in any bathroom. I don't think they'll. I mean, maybe. Although I do know last year they did a convention and they endorsed psychedelics and shrooms and stuff, which I guess those are the hippie Dems that want their psychedelics legalized. But they don't do that, and even if they did, the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel doesn't even really report on that.
Mm-hmm. They're not going to.
They're not going to, because I remember the story was literally just on the psychedelics thing and maybe legalizing marijuana and such. So we should do away with it completely. I'm sorry, boomers, with your little pet projects. The resolution committee should be disbanded completely. We should just, if you want a resolution at your caucus, at your county party, fantastic.
Sure.
Do it there. That's fine. We don't need a state convention. State convention should only be for basically endorsing candidates for higher office.
And if you want to have some sort of Republican Party statement, it's about lowering taxes, shrinking the size of government.
We
Great.
should vote on one resolution. We could do okay. What if we concede and we just say one resolution, very generic, just kind of like what Trump did with the party platform at the RNC.
Mm-hmm.
Just do that. Yeah, I have my own personal views, but for God's sakes, I love my personal views, but I also like winning right now, and I'm not going to necessarily sacrifice the two. But there's nothing, there's nothing in the Bible or nothing in my principles that says you can't be shrewd in politics.
Exactly.
So
But-
that's all I'm really asking for.
And we touched on this already, but we're talking about the fighting internally. And, I'm someone who thinks we should all be rowing the boat in the same direction. And that goal should be getting more conservatives, more Republicans elected at every level in the state, from statewide down to county board and local board. And right now we've got a couple disparate organizations kind of fighting it out, even though, again, we want to move in the same direction. That's I'm going to get scolded because I'm going to use the words interchangeably, but it's Turning Point USA or Turning Point Action versus RPW right now. And personally, I've seen a lot of the fighting that's going on, and I wasn't like a big Turning Point guy. I know a lot of people that work for them. I like them. I didn't necessarily believe that their strategy during the last election for President Trump was the right one. I'm not going to say, anything more than that, but
you know why that void was there, though?
Because RPW wasn't knocking doors.
Well, and it's not necessarily just the knocking doors. There's a saying, I can't remember, like power abhors a vacuum.
Mm-hmm.
Someone's going to fill it.
Yep.
Which is why, the idea that, leftists aren't religious is bullcrap, because something will always rule. I can't take credit for that. That's someone else that I listened to on my podcast that said that. And same thing goes with, politics, interpersonal communications. Something will always be there to fill it. And frankly, RPW vacated it, whether they wanted to or not, or just, for a lack of trying, what have you. So Turning Point, other groups have stepped in. I might disagree with some actionable ways they have gone about doing things, but they did it. They took the initiative.
Yeah.
So I will at least give Turning Point credit for taking the initiative, going where there is a void, kind of like what we're doing right now in this conservative center right field and podcasting in Wisconsin. And I won't fault them for taking the approach of going after the disparate voters, the low propensity voters in the Republican Party. I will never fault them for that, but I would like to see how they do it.
Yes.
I've seen it. I've seen the PowerPoints. I've seen the kind of the veneer that they give people about knocking doors and stuff, which I think is great. I think they've kind of made it an easy access point for people that have never knocked doors before, because it can be intimidating. But I think there's just a little bit of disconnect on the execution. And I know that, if we brought in people to talk about this that are a little bit more critical of Turning Point, they talk about the 50K number that came from the reporting, and how obviously that doesn't talk about their salaries and how the people going out, but that's the other expenditures. It still isn't great. So
No.
For considering that they were going to come in big for, Schimel, and I think they only did like 150K during the Trump election. So
There's some questions about that spending.
And I don't know all of it. I'm not going to pretend to know all of it.
We've got some hang-ups on how the lit was designed by Turning Point that didn't include Brad Schimel, included a divisive race in Waukesha County on one side.
There's an evergreen right there.
Yeah,
probably.
we could that onion can be peeled for so many different ways. But at the same time, a lot of the anti-Turning Point vibe and communication that I've seen out there seems to not come from a place of, how do you say, it's boomers ranting that the children are working hard.
The children are at the controls, and we can't allow that. But It's a very fine line, and I know some people are like, "Oh, you're being a fence sitter," for Wisconsin GOP or Turning Point. But I am willing to call out either side for things wrong. I mean, I do think that the whole thing that bothered me so much, the turning point lit not having Brad Schimel,
Yep.
literally just having a URL, not even his face. You know, what are we doing? It's literature. We're talking about, if we're talking about low propensity voters, you are going to need to spell it out to them in painstakingly, low information detail.
And not just, frankly, not just low information voters. And I say this respectfully of some very close friends that I have. We were talking after the election and how it was a bummer that Brad Schimel lost. And I said, yeah, but for someone who is Attorney General, and they said, wait a second.
He was Attorney General.
They asked that question. And these are high propensity voters. These are educated people. These are people who are involved in politics. They pay attention to these things, and they still, in the amount of time in that 6-year window, had forgotten that Brad Schimel was Attorney General.
Yeah.
So you're not just talking about low information. You're talking about mid and high information voters still forgetting that information.
We're basically talking about people that aren't terminally online.
Yeah.
That
yeah.
that know, following this play by play. Yeah, well, that's disheartening to say the least, and that goes to another thing. And I wanted to just touch on briefly, because I know we harped a little bit on turning point, but I also think we have to acknowledge, and I know this was kind of interesting about how there was the numbers reported from RPW for knocking doors, from the regional field directors, number totals for the Schimel race. And I think 3 of them were under 500 doors.
And in my day, on some of the recall races I worked on, 500 doors was a good Saturday. And I'm not lying. Like, we put up phone numbers that were absurd. And I know phone is a little passé now. Dialing, directly to voters is not how we necessarily do things anymore. It's probably not the best use. But they threw text messaging into some of that to pump up numbers, and that seems disingenuous.
Context, so phone, text, or even if you, I think it also included even if you tried to call someone and they didn't answer.
Yeah,
which
that's leaving the voicemail.
That's
basically
that's
a robocall.
Contact. Yeah, that does. So the fact that, and I believe it's 3 of the RFDs were under 500 doors, which I believe Dan O'Donnell reported back in April, like a week or 2 after the election. So I think it's interesting that those numbers probably came within RPW. Someone saw them, was clearly pissed off, leaked it to Dan O'Donnell.
As it should have been.
As it should have been, because otherwise we wouldn't have known.
Like I said, we were knocking 500 doors. And it's a true number. 500 doors.
Like one person?
The campaign. The campaign on a Saturdays.
But like how
during
many
the
people?
recall? Half a dozen.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
And especially if you have people of varying abilities,
Yep.
Yeah, that would be a good day. And those are actual doors.
Yes.
One house, one door.
One house, one door.
Not the one house, but there's 6 people in there. Therefore,
because 4 of those people have moved. But if you want to gin up your numbers, you put all 6 in.
Yeah.
I know how that game works.
Yeah, it's not great, and it's kind of a shell game. I mean, if anything, I think this ties in nicely to, with all this doom and gloom, all these races that we've lost, all this ground that we've ceded, the Dems are on the doorstep of the state Senate. They're one. If they get that, then they're only one house away. And I think we should look to the one house that has been consistent here, and at least that'd be the legislature at large, but the assembly, of course. If it's not broke, don't fix it. Clearly, something is going on in these individual assembly races across the state that works. And, not to name names or anything, Robin Voss has done well, okay, in these races. So why don't we take a page out of his book, maybe apply it to RPW? And I understand that they're somewhat different entities, but maybe RPW should humble itself and take some pointers. And maybe if Robin ever retires, or when he retires, if he retires, I don't know. I don't know what his plans are. RPW chairman Robin Voss, obviously his haters would absolutely hate it. They would be at his neck. But personally, I don't care if I get along with the RPW chairman. I want a killer. I want a cutthroat. I want someone that I might not get along with, but they'll raise the money and they'll make the decisions that have to be made.
We need the ghost of Lee Atwater
Yes.
to run the Republican Party of Wisconsin, or we need to go back in time, bring Reince Priebus from 2011 into 2025, and have him do it all over again. Because I know there's a lot of people that are fretting about the maps. Let's remember, the maps that the GOP won on in 2010 were Dem-drawn maps.
Them gerrymanders, yeah.
Yeah. So it can be done again, but we have to be doing it again if we're all rowing the boat in the same direction, if we are getting off our ass and knocking doors. And right now we're not seeing those numbers. We're not seeing the fundraising numbers. We're not seeing the voter contact numbers that we want to see out of any organization, really. Even though I do want to shout out Americans for Prosperity. When I see a post from them on social, it is them out knocking doors. It's them with lit in their hands, rain or shine. They seem to be busting their butt to get conservative legislators and candidates elected. Mm-hmm. And the fact is, I want to talk to these people. RPW, Turning Point, AFB, what have you. I want to know from them directly what they're doing different or what they think they can do better so we can get back to the expectation that we have come to know, and that's a 64-seat assembly majority. That's 19 senators.
Why stop at 64, 66? Get the supermajority.
We got very close a couple of times.
Yeah, we did, but frankly, those days are over until, redistricting, whenever that happens.
And that's why it's so important to be doing this right now. It's so important to try to reach a new generation of voters and through our listeners, is because that redistricting is not that far away.
No, and it's going to sneak up on us probably quicker than we would like to.
And the last thing I want to see is us have to redraw either Scott Fitzgerald or Brian Stile or Glenn Grothman out and give Glenn Moore or Mark Pocan a larger or more liberal district.
Yeah.
Because right now we're on the chopping block.
Mm-hmm.
That's a whole separate conversation. But
yeah, the congressional maps, obviously there's the whole lawsuit going on. We'll have to that's going to be its own episode, the whole map situation. We'll probably have to have a very special guest on for that one. Yeah. Hopefully we can coordinate schedules. But yes, we need to I really don't think we have to reinvent the wheel. Clearly, the assembly, Robin Voss, has got something. He's got the sauce, the magic. They're doing something that works. Now, I understand individual assembly seats of 60,000 people is not a statewide operation. But you can take that and maybe apply it because, I didn't, I'm not integral within the Michaels campaign. So, and I obviously wasn't the biggest proponent of Michaels during the primary. Still wish AFP would have gotten off the sidelines and maybe put their money where their mouth was for Rebecca. But that's years ago, so I won't bring up that old wound. So we need. I don't necessarily know about the merits of knocking doors for a statewide race as much anymore. Just because, and I'm not saying we abandon it completely. Mm-hmm. I think knocking doors for an assembly seat where it's so limited and you can actually talk to people like multiple times is much more worthwhile. But I do think that politics has shifted, especially at the federal level. Do we really think knocking doors for Trump was impactful?
Well, I mean, Tip O'Neill has a book. His entire philosophy was all politics is local. And I think it's actually completely flipped now, is that all politics is national.
Yeah, I agree on in a certain respect, yes. Yeah.
Having 60-plus targeted assembly districts and 19-plus targeted Senate districts trickles up. Because if you're knocking doors in Menominee Falls, you're not just doing it for Dan Knodel or the other, any other Republican candidates there. You're also asking out there, hey, you're going to vote for Dan, that's great. Are you going to vote for the state Senate candidate? Are you going to vote for Ron Johnson or the Senate candidate? You're going to vote for our governor's candidate. And even, throw on John Leiber. Throw on, our Secretary of State candidate.
I
Like
would
all
love-
those,
yes,
it
please.
flows up. You get that name ID. So you combine the national or statewide targeted media effort with the localized door knocking candidate. It should all trickle up, and I think we've lost track of that.
Well, and I think it would be very interesting. Because these races are so localized. You can, if you're knocking just for that area, I mean, you could run into the same people twice, X amount of times.
Oh, we knocked doors 2-3 times, same time. Just
Yeah. Exactly.
And hey, one person with a Lime scooter or one of those electric
Can do
scooters.
some damage.
Exactly.
And but my point being, I like the trickle up where if RPW were to take the model that whatever the shadow governor does, and I don't know necessarily the inner workings. Maybe we could have him on and he can, give us some insight. Take RPW at a statewide level and do those localized, efforts. I mean, I don't think that hiring 4 or 5 RFDs is going to do it. I'm sorry, it's not. It's not. I mean, you probably need double, if not triple that.
Absolutely.
In certain areas of the state, and knocking 500 doors in a cycle during the Schimel cycle in random parts of Dane County isn't going to do anything. And it just, I don't know the inner workings of RPW and which doors they targeted. Clearly, it wasn't very many, but why don't we go to something that's worked, copy that, and at least give it a shot, because it can't get any worse at this point.
Absolutely agree.
Although Schimel could have probably lost by 15. If Elon
If
Musk
his name was
money-
Dan Kelly.
I mean, to be fair, Dan Kelly did better in some areas of
That's
the state.
true.
So
That's
I haven't done a full look at that, but regardless of all that, I know we hit on it a little bit. Tony Evers is still their governor, or our governor, their candidate. Maybe he runs again. He's not exactly the most, and he'll say boring wins, but he's not the most inspiring person.
No.
And even some of the Dems won't admit it, at least right to our faces. But there is kind of, I think, brewing underneath the surface, a chance for us to, maybe nominate an inspiring candidate, someone that we can, right the ship a little bit. I mean, the Dems just got done, shelving Joe Biden. They're not exactly in a strong position either. So I think we do still have an opportunity with Tony Evers, although a strong incumbent. He has his own downfalls.
Oh yeah, and we have candidates right now we have legislators on the Dem side right now who are tapping their watch, looking at Tony and saying, "Your time is done. My time is now."
Do you know any of those people?
Well, I believe it was on Wisconsin or one of the Wis Politics show that Kelda Roys was out there saying that, well, Democrats really only run for 2 terms. And that's not subtle. And if you know anything about the 2018 race, and allegedly, I'm going to say this allegedly because can't confirm this.
Can neither confirm nor deny.
Well, allegedly, Kelda Roys was out on the campaign trail running in 2018 saying Tony's not fit for office. His cancer is back. And for her to say something like that then.
And of course, there might have been a conflict of interest because she was also running.
Yes. This was when she was running for governor.
So she was trying to Biden Tony before it was cool.
Before Bidening a candidate was a cool thing to do, she was there. And I'm sure if she could find a sympathetic ear, she would absolutely do it again. And then it's all hell's going to break loose on the Dem side. And then the Republicans could easily just sweep in and take over after a divided Democrat primary. When you have an incumbent, you have someone who maybe isn't the sharpest anymore. Maybe he's doing a little sundowning after his pickleball game. Maybe he's only doing work between 9 a.m. and 1 p.m. because that's when his brain's working best. And Kelda's right there waiting. And I'm sure she wakes up in the morning and looks in the mirror turns on CNN and MSNBC at the same time and sees Jasmine Crockett and AOC out there and says, that should be me. I deserve it more than them. And she so desperately wants to be more than a state senator that I think she's willing to do some dastardly things to put herself in a position to be more than that, which is dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
But
it's
also
dangerous for the party, but ambition is a hell of a drug. And you never know. I tend to think that the Dems will fall in line at the end of the day. I do think it's very interesting that you're posed a question, is Tony Evers going to run for a third term?
Mm-hmm.
Literally everybody and their mother in the Democrat Party could say, yes, I hope he runs. He's been a great governor, holding back the radical Republican Party, blah, 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 blah. No, actually, well, governors only typically run twice. So although notable, I do think she'll eventually fall in line. Although, yes, I think she's worried about, and I don't necessarily think it's just her. I think there are other Democrats that are worried about being boxed out, potentially with our Attorney General, Josh Call.
Yeah. Sarah Godlewski, our Kirkland signature, Leslie Knope.
Of course.
At Secretary of State.
I kind of miss her social media posts where, she tries to be the constitutional office that she thinks she is, when in actuality she has no power.
And then gets community noted on those because she has no power. And,
she has no power.
I mean, you even go on Wikipedia, you see that the Wisconsin Secretary of State is measurably the least powerful constitutional officer in this country. And the only thing they have going for them is they are third in line. They are after the lieutenant governor in line to be governor if something should be fall the top two.
What's really funny, though, is I've heard national podcasts talk about, especially after 2020 or, after 2022, and they were talking about all those secretaries of state kind of going after Trump for what have you, because the Secretary of States technically have been in charge of the elections, and they would mention, all the swing states are controlled by Democrat secretaries of state, and they would always mention Wisconsin. And I'm like, well, I hate to break it to you guys, but Wisconsin Secretary of State is meaningless. Regardless, that it won't stop her from running for higher office. I do think Sarah Godlewski is above the state level. She's desperate for the Tammy Baldwin seat, or taking on Ron Johnson, or whoever decides to run if Ron doesn't run.
Quick story about how useless and forgettable and powerless the Secretary of State office is. Do you know that in 2012, Doug LaFollette, who is some distant relation to Fighting Bob and could claim it just through his last name, was so unknown, even though he was running for the governor in the recall election, was stopped by local media for a man on the street interview without knowing who he was.
Wow.
It's just so pathetic. And he was such a wiener.
I just loved it. I mean, the sheer gall to be like, I'm going to run for re-election using my state resources in the Capitol. I'm, basically right out. I mean, I guess technically, who knows when Doug LaFollette was on the job versus off the job? I mean, he was never on the job.
No, he's not, because the job was nothing.
The job was nothing. So I guess he got out of that one just by sheer happenstance. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see whether Tony runs again, whether the Democrats have someone to rally around. I mean, of course they'll vote blue no matter who. But it'll be certainly interesting, and we'll have to cover that in probably another episode. We could do a whole episode on gubernatorial dynamics.
Absolutely, and we should. But should we get to some fun stuff? Some candy.
Yeah, of course.
All right. So there were a bunch of fun stories we've talked about since we wanted to do this podcast, and we've kind of been updating them and such. And I know you and I were both on Twitter yesterday, kind of ripping the Journal Sentinel for not covering the illegal immigrant who threatened to assassinate the president, allegedly, right? Because that's where this story gets absolutely crazy. Then there was an undocumented man who named Ramon Morales Reyes, 54, was accused of writing a letter saying he was going to shoot President Trump in the head. He was arrested by ICE, reasonably so. But now it's come out, and the defense of this guy is that he lacks the proficiency in writing in English or Spanish to write that letter.
Is that Joe Biden?
It must be.
Because what the Inspector General was basically, this guy can't stand trial because he's so not there that he wouldn't be able to be fit. So this guy basically doesn't know English enough to basically write the letter.
So someone is writing letters on behalf of allegedly illegal immigrants, trying to get them deported.
You know, to be fair, I don't know if I should say it's a good thing, because you should never break the law and commit identity thefts. But I believe in that article, it also says that he crossed the border illegally 9 times from his first time of entering, I think it was in the early 2000s, till today. 9 times he broke into the country.
Oh, and not just that. Morales Reyes has been connected to a hit-and-run incident and an incident of disorderly conduct and property damage relating to a domestic abuse in 1996.
Well, I'm surprised Hannah Dugan hasn't tried to bust him out of the ICE detention facility.
I'm sure they're right next to each other in prison.
Oh, gosh.
So, just a crazy story. Another crazy story we should be talking about. If you heard this one.
Let's hear it.
An Epic executive was busted on a plane flying from Michigan back to Wisconsin, being drunk, was going to get thrown off the plane, forced the entire plane to deboard, still refused to get off the plane. His name's Carl Dvorak, a high-level employee at Epic System, right in Madison.
Yep.
Was arrested in November 2024 at the Wayne County Airport in Michigan. We got this from Outkick. So fun news organization there. You got to watch this video. We should link to it in our show notes. At one point, Dvorak said he wanted to be handcuffed so he could file a lawsuit. Is there anything police love more than saying, I dare you to handcuff me because I'm going to sue you?
That's a very Madison thing. It's a very Madison thing. I feel like he's probably gone to a protest or two where they want to get arrested.
He has to have one of those "In this house we believe" signs in his front yard. I mean,
yes, no human is illegal. Yada yada yada. The rainbow sign, which has all the words on it. He definitely has one of those.
I demand to be left on this. I demand to be able to be drunk on an airplane.
Or what is it? The Arrested Development. We demand to be taken seriously. A bit.
I demand to drunk fly, according to sources in Wayne County, Michigan. So, just a crazy one. Another crazy one out of Madison.
The Wisconsin connections never cease.
No, I saw that article and I was like, oh, this guy can't be. He looks like he's from Wisconsin.
Well,
he looks like he's an Epic exec. So, the other one out of Madison recently. I just love this because, we had this whole long conversation about, our internal struggle with the conservative movement and the Wisconsin GOP. But let's not forget that Dems will always eat themselves.
Of course.
Madison Civil Rights Director Norman Davis accused of discrimination. Amazing story. 6 months after employees raised alarms about the top official in Madison Department of Civil Rights, the city now plans to hire an external investigator to examine the allegations, according to the Cap Times. Nearly a dozen current and former staffers are accusing Norman Davis, the department's director, of discriminating against women and people with disabilities.
So the civil rights guy, the head civil rights guy, was discriminating against women and people with disabilities.
Yes.
The irony is so thick you could cut it.
Yes. This guy. And again, don't know if it's true, but the fact is that no amount of leftness is enough.
But how do we know? What if it's I'm not trying to defend the guy, because frankly I don't care. But what are the odds that this is maybe the left eating their own in a way that maybe he didn't do what they're saying, but the people accusing him are so left wing that they perceive what he did as.
It's always a microaggression.
Yeah, where it's like, oh, it was a micro. I mean, I have no idea, but I could very well see it the other side where maybe he didn't do necessarily anything wrong, and they are just so hyper, the microaggressions,
Yes.
where they're so triggered by even the slightest thing that they consider that.
Now, I don't know too much about Norman, other than he was the Department of Civil Rights leader. But he's a guy. I don't see... Cap Times doesn't list his pronouns. He looks like a guy, and he doesn't have blue hair.
So he's probably a likely target then.
Right, and if you're not one of those people in Dane County,
You will be.
Yeah, right.
You will be eventually by force.
Yes. So...
Or you'll flee to Jefferson County or Sauk or Columbia.
Yeah, so fun stories that we need to keep covering. We're going to try to bring you more candy every time we're out here, more fun stories, so go along with the vegetables. And I'm not the first person to use that term, but the vegetables of a nice long conversation about what we should be doing
the meat
right.
And potatoes, and then you got to have a little dessert.
You got to have a little dessert. We're going to keep that going.
And let us know about other topics you want us to talk about.
Yeah,
more individuals you want us to speak with, questions, concerns, email us.
Yep. So feel free to hit us up. We've got, our Twitter accounts. Message us there. newfashionedpod@gmail.com is where you can find us if you want to send us something long form. You want to send us some memes? Great. Dropping them into our DMs. You want to send us some hate mail? We will read it on air. You want to send us some feedback? Love it.
5 stars on Apple Podcast.
And
we only accept 5 stars and 1 stars. Either like us or hate us.
Yes.
I don't want a lukewarm, like, you guys were like kind of okay. Like, no. Let's not be a fence sitter. You like us or you hate us.
Yes, and we will read those 5 stars and 1 stars.
Yes.
As they come through.
I would love to do that.
We're going to find our show notes at newfashionconservative.substack.com, as well as, like I said, we're going to be up on X, Rumble, Truth Social, Instagram, Facebook, all of the places you can find us for New Fashioned.
Stay tuned for the next episode.
Yeah, like I said, our goal is to get these out weekly. So we're going to try, bear with us as we learn to edit these things as we go through them. But
yeah, we are newbies. Okay.
Dude, I thought we crushed this one. So let's sign us off.
Yeah, take care, guys. We'll see you on the next one.
For the New Fashion Conservative Pod, I'm Justin Phillips.
Shadow Governor Voss, Robert Voss, the strongest soldier.
Good night.